So there's the physical recovery that happens, but no one really talks about just how hard it is going to be to get back to whatever your version of normal is going to look like after something like that happens to you. Welcome to This Life Reconsidered, and my name is Janina. I focus on making content that highlights the importance of personal development, self-care, and navigating that whole complicated work-life integration hustle. So if you're interested in getting content that focuses on positive thinking and self-development, then you may want to hit that subscription button on the lower right. So I have been thinking about this particular video for a while, ever since I started this channel. As I've mentioned in a few videos, I experienced a stroke several years ago and thankfully have successfully recovered from it, which I'm so grateful for. It's taught me a lot about myself, which is kind of the impetus for why I started this channel. I think I spent a little bit of time kind of talking about, the mechanics of that journey. I think I have a pretty involved video that kind of goes into that. But what I don't think I've done as great a job about, and what I wanted to be really careful to make sure I outlined, is the road to normal. It's obviously very clear to outline kind of like the mechanics, the therapy you have to go through depending on the extremity of your trauma and things like that. Those are all textbook and things that you just kind of have to do to make sure you can kind of get back to tip-top shape. But after that, after you've gone through all of those drills and exercises and repetition to stretch out your brain and make sure that it's all kind of primed and ready to kind of enter the world again, metaphorically, where do you go from that? And so I spent a lot of time and I outlined kind of some notes because I wanted to kind of speak to the journey to recovery. Like after you go through the therapy and all that other stuff, how do you kind of embark on the road of getting to whatever your new normal is going to be? And the reason I'm saying that is because whether it sounds as logical to you versus not to other people, recovering from that kind of medical trauma is only part of the journey. Once you recover, what do you do with that kind of rebounding, the version of yourself now, and how do you cope emotionally, and how do you allow yourself to adapt to the world? Or do you just jump into the world the same way that you lived it? But that's not always very common, and I think people don't realize that there's a recovery journey, like the physical, like the mechanics, the things that are to treat your condition, but then there's also the emotional and personal building you need to do once you decide to kind of re-enter the world. And so I outlined kind of what I thought were the most critical realities as I completed my textbook recovery, for lack of a better way of putting it. The first step that was really, really amazingly overwhelming after finishing all my training was the thought of testing out all the training and therapy that I had gone through. The reality is that speech cognitive therapy, which is basically just kind of where therapists kind of work and give you a lot of really scientifically designed exams to make sure that your brain is kind of being remolded again, or basically the way I like to kind of think about it is just to make sure that your brain is kind of ready again and is reprimed to do what it knows how to do. And but I realized that once you do all that training, now you need to kind of go into the world and do that. And so I realized in doing that it was not only going to be its own challenge, but I was going to have to realize that just because you get that training, that doesn't mean you can automatically just dive in immediately doing things the exact way. You have to now get used to applying everything that you've learned and letting it kind of gradually kind of get much more normal for you. Because the truth of the matter is that yes, you've done all the exercises, but now you have to push yourself a little bit, figure out what you feel comfortable with. And it has to be a much more gradual process. The reality is I knew all the same things, but I now had to, in the real world, had to access it a little differently and get used to kind of maybe slowing down a little bit to give my mind a little bit of a moment to get adjusted. Because the reality is, at least in my case, I took a little bit of an intentional break from the world because I wanted the runway to kind of get comfortable. And that was just a personal choice. Everyone's very different, but I wanted to kind of give myself a lot of air cover to kind of get comfortable with how I was seeing the world through a different mind. Not that I didn't know the same information, but that I was getting much more comfortable with how I was accessing that kind of information in real time. So you just have to give yourself the ability to get comfortable with how your mind starts kind of stretching itself a little bit. And it's kind of like, think about it like this, like, if you were a very active marathon runner and then you try to run a marathon immediately, you probably wouldn't exactly be equipped to do it, right? But if you want to be equipped to run that marathon, you're going to have to train again. And then you're going to have to give yourself the comfort and the runway to build that endurance again. It's the same concept. So just because you were running marathons before, it doesn't mean you're going to be doing that out the gate, but you can with time and giving yourself the comfort. And that's kind of what I viewed the training to getting back to life to be a little bit. Once I was allowed to kind of give myself that runway to kind of start stretching my training and getting comfortable with it, I was physically kind of building the endurance that I was going to need to kind of get back to the same version of myself eventually. But I had to give myself that pacing. I was kind of like a marathon runner that had taken a break and now needed to kind of jump back or gradually give myself the runway. The next thing I will say was after, realizing that I needed the runway, I realized that as I kind of focused on recovery, that I was finding myself much more kind of overwhelmed and understanding of different environments, and I say that to say that it was kind of like the things that I was probably much more willing to just kind of deal with and things that I was willing to overlook, I guess wasn't kind of the same thing for me. Like, I think my priorities and the way that I kind of process environments was a little different. And that was, again, a personal thing. I just kind of realized that I wanted to give myself an opportunity to identify different types of environments that I'd be much more comfortable in. And I think that that's really important, especially like gradually. I think that a lot of people, when they suffer kind of like a very significant event like that, they feel like it is just so that they have to kind of go and do things the exact same way and be in the same kind of situations. And sometimes that may not always be the way to go. So I found that for me, I needed to kind of give myself a lot more air cover to get comfortable with different types of environments and different types of situations. And I think it was also teaching me a lot more about the kind of person that I was becoming. Not that I had changed completely, but I was kind of evolving. And that's a personal thing, especially when you're talking about emotionally trying to kind of get through such a significant experience. The third thing that I realized was a big learning thing and a big reality for me was that I now had different kind of thresholds. I realized that I used to be able to kind of put in 18 hours like straight, and realized that, and some of this also comes with age, but at some point I realized that maybe, you know what? Maybe I'm ready to shut down at 12 hours and slow down a little bit or give myself more breaks. I just realized that my pace was had to be much more deliberate. Like I had to kind of give myself much more air cover to breathe a little bit, to collect myself a little bit, or more license to slow down. And you realize that that's something that comes with like a medical trauma. I think a lot of people feel like they need to move the exact same way in order to kind of prove that they've recovered. But there's a maturity in recovering in which you realize that you now have different paces, especially if you want to move at the same kind of level of quality of life, right? You can still move at the same quality, but pace yourself a little differently getting there. So I realized that paying attention to my new thresholds was going to be critical if I was going to be like operating at the same level that I had before everything I had suffered. And realizing that if I had allowed myself to kind of put more guardrails and more structure in the way that I lived, then maybe I could allow myself to get exactly back to the standard and the quality of life I was living. The fourth thing I realized also when I was going through all this was how really, really critical it was going to be for me to trust myself. And because here's the thing, I think that when you go through something pretty significant like that, it's almost very, very like too obvious to kind of start second guessing yourself. Did I do that correctly? Or is my mind playing tricks on me? Or, things like that. And you just start kind of losing a little bit more confidence because, you start second guessing yourself. But I found that it wasn't that I wasn't kind of doing things like the same way or things like that. It was just me getting confident with the fact that I had really recovered. And this kind of feeling comes because when you suffer something that feels that it has impacted something that you rely on, like your perception or your mind and things like that, it is very easy to feel as though you can't really trust its own recovery. And so I had to realize that I couldn't be afraid to kind of get comfortable with the way that my mind is working, and that it doesn't mean that things are wrong with me, and accepting the fact that I was getting better and that I had been given the tools to recover. So for step 5, I would say that the most critical thing for me, and this one I spent a lot of time thinking about as I was kind of designing this episode. As I got to my new normal and my new everyday, I started realizing that I was going to need to kind of put my personal priorities in check, and I was going to have to be much more clear about defining what those were going to be. Did I want to live life exactly the way I was living it? Or did I want to recover as smoothly and as polishly as I could at my timetable? Did I want to adjust the pace that would feel much more comfortable to me until I felt like I could run at the same speed? Or did I even want to run at the same speed? These are all the questions that I really started asking myself once I had been cleared to kind of go back into everything, and after the therapy and the textbooks training is done. Like, this is the kind of stuff that they don't tell you and that you have the ability to kind of automatically learn out the gate. This is the kind of stuff that you have to kind of learn with a little bit of trial and error. because, this is such a personal thing. Like recovery and identifying the version of yourself after all of that is such a very personal thing. And everyone has to experience that timetable on their own journey. And it's completely fine and to kind of not be sure what pace you want to run at. But if you're going to know what that is, you deserve to kind of give yourself the ability to kind of ease in to that level of comfort. For me, I decided that I kind of wanted to kind of maybe like take a slightly graduate pace and then allow myself to pick up the speed as I got completely comfortable with that timetable, because I didn't want to throw myself and overwhelm myself. But some people, that may be the way that you work. And that, again, is a very personal thing. But it is very, very, very important to kind of identify what your guardrails are and how it is you decide to kind of step into life. Because the reality is that even when you do recover very successfully from that kind of event, it's still a huge life-altering event. And you have to give yourself the license to recover the way that you're going to recover and heal. And if you are fortunate enough to get back to life, and get back to the kind of responsibilities and the kind of things that you had held the same way, then it's up to you to kind of give yourself an opportunity to embrace that and live it how it feels appropriate for yourself. Because not everyone moves at the same pace, and not only and you can't always just kind of throw yourself in the same way. So as you start kind of getting comfortable with that, that's the kind of thing that you start learning as you start getting familiar with the version of yourself. Because even though you are who you are, you still have changed a bit, and it's okay to kind of live through that journey, and embrace it, because honestly, it is a part of who you are, and not everyone has the ability and the possibility to rebound, to get back to life as they know it. But if you do, you deserve to kind of take the pace as it works for you. So here's the thing. The recovery journey is honestly not a perfect one, and no one nails it the same way. But if you're going to be given the chance and the possibility to kind of rebound and get back to life, then don't waste the shot by pushing yourself to feel things that don't feel natural, and allow it to be a teachable opportunity on who you are, on who you want to be, and what version you want to be once you're up and running. One of the things that I am so grateful for learning is that I don't have to necessarily be a workaholic to be still amazing at my job. And things like that are tiny little insights, especially, and realizing that I was expending so much energy and it was taking so much out of me. But that wasn't the way that I wanted to return to life. And I knew that because I had the opportunity to return, I wanted the ability to kind of ease into things. Again, that's personal, but it's up to you to decide kind of what that journey really feels like. I mean, what are your thoughts? What kind of words or wisdom would you offer to someone that is trying to adapt to life after a challenging or major change, something like a stroke or anything pretty life altering? I don't know. I'd love to get any other thoughts or any other insights that you think would apply to kind of experiencing such a major situation. I look forward to getting your notes in the comments and hearing your feedback, and I'll see you in the next one.